So you've both taught and facilitated SARs at MSTI for many years. When you compare the earliest ones to today's, what's the most striking evolution you've witnessed in terms of like content format, or who's in the room? And like what have you had to change to keep it current and what's remained the same?
Hmm. Go ahead, Ricky.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, 25, 30 years ago, a bunch of professionals sitting around a room together watching sexually explicit media was a really weird thing, a very unusual, rare thing, not something that most people did. Now in
Hmm.
2026, the thought of sexually explicit media on the internet is pretty like whoop-de-doo, right? Big
Yeah.
deal.
Right,
Who hasn't been there and done that? So the tech has changed things.
right.
Uh,
And we don't have to walk around with suitcases full of videotapes anymore.
yeah, that's true. Right. Or CDs. We used to have two
Well,
televisions
later
side
on, it
by
became
Oh my
side.
for
gosh.
sure.
Yeah, it used to be quite the production.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's been really less a focus on the kind of shock value that a lot of the media used to have, and more on what hasn't changed is that the SAR is about processing content,
Hmm.
right? So no matter
Mhm.
what the participants are exposed to, it could be just like you saw the kind of basic self-reflecting activities we did on the earlier part, or watching some pretty hardcore, intense BDSM scenes. Um, the content is less important than how folks get together and process that content.
hmm Yeah, and I think, as a foundation, that's, the core of some of these changes.
Hmm.
It used to be really about being reactive, and now it's more about being reflective. And
Yeah.
and I think that, again, that point about how ubiquitous erotic imagery is now, and even what we would call porn, how easily accessible, easily available. It's not really a big thing anymore in terms of, wow, we're going to see, this is an opportunity to see that. Uh,
Hmm.
but I think what hasn't changed is the idea of identifying implicit biases, hotspots, reaction points, um, and some of that is even reflected in, again, less about the imagery than how the imagery is framed. We look more at, I think there's a social justice framework that
Yeah.
is now a part of it. There is a diversity and intersectionality framework that was never really a part of it. So I think we're really seeing more of a reflection of how these issues and how we are thinking about social
Hmm.
interactions in a way that we hadn't in the past.
Yeah, well, you just led me perfectly into my next question, which is because there has been such a enormous cultural movement around gender identity, kink, non-monogamy, and sexual diversity broadly. How has the SAR stretched to meet those conversations? And do you still feel like there are areas that are untreated there?
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
there will always be, right? Because like I
Hmm.
Absolutely.
just said, as we wrapped up the SAR, my favorite thing about the field of sexology is that you could study it for 200 years and never finish the study. But that is a really important point that you just made, and to tie it to Larry's last point about being more reflective than reactive. I think a lot of folks come to SAR trainings today hoping to see themselves and make sure that they're well represented rather than, 30 years ago, it's like, oh my goodness, these are trans folks. Wow. Oh my goodness, these are sex workers. Wow. It was really there was a kind of a rarity and a novelty. Today, folks are like, I damn well better see myself in this next
Hmm.
couple of days. And I want to see
Mhm.
that it's not just a heteronormative, uh,
Yeah.
cisgendered kind of bias.
Hmm.
Right, right. And adding to that, I think, thinking back in years past where we've had professionals that really were in tears and having a breakdown because they felt they were being forced to be exposed to these kinds of images. because there was kind of a naivete and lack of experience. And, now, and again, certainly not for everybody, but now
Yeah.
it's more likely that we have people coming in that, in addition to, I better see myself represented, but there's also for some more of this challenge. I dare you to show me something I don't already know about.
Hmm.
I dare you to shock me
Yeah.
almost. So
Yeah.
again, I think that goes back
Yeah.
to how the role of sexual images and media has changed,
Hmm.
with the subsequent generations.
Yeah. Well, I know having just taken the SAR, I noticed so much, right, of how intentional you all were with bringing in different identities and exposing us to so many different things. So I can see that in what you're talking about.
Hmm.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm
And as
glad
far as
I.
undertreated, I think, yeah, I don't know that I identify anyone or anything that's especially undertreated, but it has certainly been a goal to, with each successive year, to increase the diversity,
Hmm.
especially, it's kind of ironic. We were just saying how ubiquitous all of this has become, but as of the very right now, with all of the political insanity, ironically, it's getting harder and harder to find porn again. So
Yeah.
that's also affected kind of how we put together content for the
Mm.
SAR trainings.
Right.
Yeah.
And, that also reminds me that, again, that whole, because you triggered something like Pornhub to come up into my mind. And I think that there is, every time something evolves, especially when it's been locked away for so long, when it's finally released, there's sometimes a tendency to go a little too far over to the other side. And I think when we have discovered some of these concepts and relearned and understood concepts like ethical porn, just to use that as an example, I think we sometimes lose sight of what is an actual versus an aspiration.
Mm.
And then I think what happens, I'll throw another A word in there, then it becomes very arbitrary in how we're sort of creating a standard that we hold other people by. So, and while this is part of what people come in with, I think the SAR becomes a good opportunity to try to peel some of those layers away and get
Yeah.
away from the personal rhetoric that so many people have. And as an older guy, I do have to say I notice a big difference between how we arm ourselves with our personal rhetoric and identity today than we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I think being able to pull back and peel back some of those kinds of layers in order to get to what's really going on in our core, our
Hmm.
reactions, reflecting on what we're really feeling as opposed to what we're projecting. And again, the SAR, I think, is still a wonderful opportunity for professionals to do a little digging, you know,
Yeah.
into themselves and make them
Yes.
more vulnerable.
Yeah. And I know you've both given me so many reasons why clinicians should take a SAR already, but I know some clinicians are still skeptical, wondering if a SAR is actually something that's necessary for clinical work. What
Mhm.
does
Right.
a SAR do that coursework or supervision or reading simply doesn't do?
I'm
Oh, I
just going
love
to
that
just
question.
follow up on what I just said. I think it's a great
Yeah.
question, but it's that experiential piece. It
Hmm.
is, you're not rhetorically connecting with this information. You're affectively, you are emotionally. And no matter what has changed, the one thing that hasn't changed, and I can remember from the very first SAR I attended in like 1989, I think it was, 88, 89, maybe 1990. But the one thing that I still see that I'm so glad to see are all these people coming in armed with everything that they're armed with and all their experiences and all their ideations, and they're still walking away surprised that they're reacting to certain things.
Mm.
And there's no
Just the,
substitute, right?
yeah,
There's no
one
substitute.
thing that's still different about the SAR from all of the other trainings we do is that idea of taking our professional hat off.
Right.
Most of us are so used
Yeah.
to going to trainings with the mindset of teach me something to make me a better therapist or a better counselor. And this is like, show me something to make me more in touch with myself and
Mm,
possible reactions I may have in the course of being a therapist or a counselor
Yeah.
or an educator.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, this is still it's a very old school kind of thing because
Yeah.
this is still sort of a reflection of what, for example, in the past, if you wanted to be a psychoanalyst or a psychodynamic therapist, you yourself had to go through the process so that you can
Yeah.
identify those sensitivities and those reaction points and those hot buttons. So,
Hmm.
as it continues to evolve and stay up to date, and in some cases, I think be cutting edge, it's still a very old school kind of process.
Yeah, but I think it's so important. And I think you
Absolutely.
both might have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. For a clinician who has never done a SAR, what would you most want them to know about what they're walking away with?
That
Ah,
opportunity to have a self-reflecting exercise and to have an opportunity in a safe place with other clinicians to maybe be exposed to something that, if for nothing else, it helps with our little poker face that you're not sitting across from a patient going, "You do what?"
right.
Right? And so, if nothing else, it's a little practice, a little exposure to get in the habit of what if something comes my way that I'm not so familiar with, or I'm not so sure how I would react to. And it's great for that, even though we say it's for the person, not for the professional, it also really does help those professional
Really, you
skills.
can't, they're not totally separate. Exactly.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
and I would add that, part of that walk away, um, and that part of that self-reflection is also, I think, a shift in expectation and understanding, whatever we want to call it, that I want people to know that they're probably going to be walking away with a whole lot more questions than
Mm,
answers. And that is, I think, a very important process because we have to learn how to sit with those vague, gray,
yeah.
unanswered kinds of things. And I think there's too much of a tendency to just jump right into and have to put a period on the end of that sentence, right?
Yes.
Instead of a dot, dot, dot,
Hmm.
or just a
Yeah.
question.
Yes. Well, as someone who just took it, I would say that I am leaving with a lot more questions and like sitting with things. So I think you're both spot on there.